The human cost, personnel, and casualties. Behind every corporate earnings report and contract announcement lies a reality that Constellis prefers to keep private. The human beings who carry out these operations face death and injury at rates that would shock most Americans. The men and women deployed by private military contractors work in environments where violence is routine, medical evacuation takes hours or days, and the psychological toll accumulates over years of exposure to trauma that most people never experience. These personnel operate without the institutional support systems that protect uniformed military members, yet they face identical risks while generating profits for shareholders who never see the physical and emotional costs of their investments. Recruitment challenges across the PMC industry reflect the fundamental contradiction between the dangerous nature of the work and the corporate structure that treats personnel as expendable assets. Companies struggle to maintain adequate staffing levels as experienced operators leave for less dangerous careers or retire due to accumulated injuries and psychological trauma. The personnel turnover rate within PMCs exceeds 35% annually, forcing companies to constantly recruit, train, and deploy new personnel who lack the experience that only comes from extended exposure to high-risk environments. This turnover creates operational risks as inexperienced personnel make mistakes that endanger missions and increase casualty rates. The backgrounds and motivations of people who choose PMC careers reveal a complex mix of economic necessity, professional ambition, and personal circumstances that drive individuals toward high-risk private military employment. Former military personnel represent the largest category of PMC recruits, drawn by salaries that can exceed their government military pay by 200 to 400%. Veterans struggling with civilian employment after military service find PMC work familiar and financially rewarding, even when they understand the risks involved. Law enforcement officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians also transition to PMC careers, bringing specialized skills that companies value highly. Economic motivations dominate recruitment strategies as companies compete for qualified personnel through salary packages that can reach $150,000 to $300,000 annually for experienced operators. These compensation levels represent life-changing income for individuals from working-class backgrounds who lack college degrees or specialized civilian skills. The financial incentives prove particularly attractive to personnel. Supporting families, paying mortgages, or saving for children's education expenses that civilian salaries cannot cover. Companies exploit these economic pressures through recruitment campaigns that emphasize financial rewards while minimizing discussion of casualty statistics or long-term health risks. Families and communities affected by PMC operations experience unique challenges that differ significantly from those faced by traditional military families. PMC families lack access to the support networks, medical benefits, and survivor assistance programs available to military spouses and children. When PMC personnel deploy for months at a time, their families manage without the community support systems that military bases provide. Children of PMC employees attend schools where counselors and teachers lack understanding of the unique stresses associated with private military deployment. Spouses struggle with isolation and anxiety while lacking access to mental health resources designed for military families. Casualty rates within PMC operations exceed those of most traditional military units due to the high-risk nature of assignments that companies accept and the operational environments where personnel work. These casualties result from everything from vehicle accidents and equipment failures to direct combat engagement and terrorist attacks targeting PMC facilities and personnel. The injury rates prove even higher, with thousands of PMC personnel suffering permanent disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and psychological trauma that affects their ability to work and maintain family relationships. Medical support systems for PMC personnel vary dramatically between companies and deployment locations, creating disparities in care quality that can determine whether injured personnel survive or recover fully from their injuries. Some PMC operations maintain sophisticated medical facilities with trauma surgeons and emergency care capabilities, while others rely on basic first aid training and evacuation to distant hospitals. The quality of medical care often depends on contract values and client requirements rather than standardized care protocols that military medical systems provide. Personnel deployed to remote locations may wait hours for medical evacuation while bleeding from wounds that military medical systems would treat within minutes. Psychological support and veteran services available to former PMC employees remain inadequate compared to the needs created by exposure to combat trauma and high-stress environments. Most PMCs provide limited mental health resources during employment and virtually no support after personnel leave company employment. Former PMC employees struggle to access veteran services through government programs because their service was private rather than military, creating gaps in care for individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and other mental health conditions associated with combat exposure. The suicide rates among former PMC personnel appear elevated compared to general population statistics, though companies rarely track or report these figures publicly. Healthcare costs associated with PMC employment create long-term financial obligations that companies manage through insurance policies and legal settlements that prioritize cost control over comprehensive care. Constellis allocated $127 million in death benefits and medical costs during 2024 to 2025, representing a substantial financial commitment that reflects the scope of injuries and fatalities within company operations. These expenditures include immediate medical care, disability payments, survivor benefits, and legal settlements with families of deceased personnel. The company's willingness to invest in these benefits demonstrates both the frequency of casualties and the legal requirements that force PMCs to provide financial support for injured employees and surviving family members. The broader social implications of privatizing military risk and sacrifice extend beyond individual casualties into fundamental questions about how American society distributes the costs of international military operations. When companies hire private contractors to perform military functions, the human costs become corporate expenses rather than national sacrifices that generate political accountability and public awareness. This privatization of risk allows policymakers to pursue military objectives without the political costs associated with military casualties that appear in newspaper headlines and generate public opposition to foreign interventions. Economic incentives continue driving recruitment despite obvious risks, as Constellis implemented 40% salary increases to maintain staffing levels adequate for operational requirements. These salary increases demonstrate how companies respond to personnel shortages created by high casualty rates and turnover problems that threaten their ability to fulfill contract obligations. The willingness to pay premium wages reflects the difficulty of recruiting qualified personnel willing to accept risks while working for corporations rather than serving national military objectives that justify personal sacrifice. Yet these human costs represent merely operational expenses within a broader corporate strategy that treats military power as an investment opportunity subject to the same financial optimization techniques. Apollo's master plan, corporate integration. The financial architecture supporting these operations reveals how thoroughly private equity has transformed military contracting into standardized investment products. Apollo Global Management's strategic vision for Constellis represents something unprecedented in American corporate history: the complete integration of private military power into mainstream investment portfolios where warfare becomes just another asset class generating quarterly returns. The private equity giant views Constellis not as a controversial military contractor, but as a profitable service business that happens to specialize in armed security rather than restaurant franchises or retail operations. This perspective transforms private military operations from matters of national security policy into corporate efficiency metrics measured by the same financial analysts who evaluate fast food chains and consumer goods companies within Apollo's diverse investment portfolio. Apollo acquired Constellis in 2014 for an undisclosed sum, positioning the private military contractor within a portfolio that includes diverse businesses ranging from consumer brands to global retailers. This acquisition reflects a broader trend of private equity involvement in the defense sector, where firms seek to capitalize on the growing demand for security and risk management services. The 2024 recapitalization deal that generated $1 billion in revenues reduced debt and positioned Constellis for continued growth, demonstrating how private equity ownership applies standard financial optimization techniques to military contracting operations. Wall Street's growing control over private military power creates fundamental tensions between profit maximization and national security objectives that traditional government oversight mechanisms cannot address effectively. Apollo manages Constellis according to the same return on investment criteria applied to every other portfolio company, regardless of whether the business involves selling hamburgers or conducting armed operations in conflict zones. Board meetings evaluate PMC performance through revenue growth metrics, profit margin improvements, and market expansion opportunities without meaningful consideration of the strategic implications these decisions create for American foreign policy or international stability. The synergies between PMC operations and Apollo's other business investments extend far beyond simple financial diversification into operational relationships that most investors never recognize. Constellis provides security services for Apollo-owned retail properties, executive protection for senior management across the investment portfolio, and risk assessment capabilities that inform investment decisions in unstable regions where Apollo considers business opportunities. These internal business relationships create cost savings and revenue streams that benefit Apollo's overall portfolio performance while obscuring the true extent of PMC integration into mainstream corporate operations. Corporate governance mechanisms that oversee PMC operations operate according to private equity standards rather than defense industry protocols, creating accountability gaps that government oversight cannot effectively address. Apollo's board includes investment professionals, former corporate executives, and financial specialists who lack experience with military operations or national security policy. These directors evaluate Constellis' performance through quarterly earnings reports, annual strategic plans, and financial projections that treat combat operations as business activities measured by profitability rather than operational effectiveness or strategic value. The potential for conflicts of interest between profit motives and national security becomes apparent when examining how investment decisions affect PMC operational priorities. Apollo's financial interests may favor contract opportunities that generate higher profit margins, even when these opportunities conflict with broader American strategic objectives or create operational risks that government agencies prefer to avoid. The company's obligation to maximize returns for Apollo's investors creates incentives to pursue business opportunities regardless of their impact on regional stability or long-term American interests. Investor relations and shareholder communications treat warfare as a business opportunity through corporate documents that discuss military operations using the same language applied to consumer goods marketing or restaurant franchise development. Apollo's annual reports describe PMC growth opportunities, market penetration strategies, and competitive positioning without acknowledging the human costs or geopolitical implications associated with private military expansion. Investor presentations highlight revenue growth potential in emerging conflict zones using PowerPoint slides that could easily describe retail expansion plans or technology market opportunities. Exit strategies and potential future sales of PMC assets demonstrate how private equity ownership transforms military capabilities into tradable commodities that can be bought and sold based on financial considerations rather than national security requirements. Apollo's investment strategy includes specific timelines for divesting Constellis assets through either strategic sales to other companies or potential market offerings that would transfer ownership to institutional investors and individual shareholders. These plans treat private military capabilities as temporary investments rather than long-term strategic assets that require stable ownership and consistent operational priorities. The accountability gaps between corporate shareholders and operational consequences become evident when examining how investment returns depend on activities that shareholders never directly observe or evaluate. Pension funds, mutual funds, and individual investors who benefit from Apollo's PMC investments receive quarterly profit distributions without knowledge of the specific operations that generate these returns. The financial mechanisms that deliver investment profits effectively shield shareholders from moral responsibility for PMC activities while ensuring that they benefit financially from private military operations conducted on their behalf. Corporate integration of private military operations into mainstream business portfolios creates systemic risks that extend beyond individual company performance into broader questions about how democratic societies control military power. When private equity firms own military contractors, the traditional mechanisms for democratic oversight and accountability become ineffective because corporate shareholders lack the information and incentives necessary to evaluate operational decisions that affect national security and international stability. Strategic planning processes within Apollo demonstrate how private equity ownership transforms military planning into corporate development activities guided by financial projections rather than strategic assessments. Constellis expansion plans focus on market opportunities that offer attractive profit margins and growth potential without necessarily considering whether these opportunities align with American foreign policy objectives or contribute to international stability. The company's strategic planning process resembles business development activities at consumer goods companies more than military planning processes used by government agencies. Financial market pressures that could affect PMC operations include quarterly earnings expectations, performance requirements, and analyst coverage that evaluates company performance according to financial metrics rather than operational effectiveness or strategic value. These market pressures force PMC management to prioritize financial performance over long-term operational capabilities or strategic relationships that government clients consider essential for national security objectives. The complete transformation of military power into corporate assets raises fundamental questions about whether democratic institutions can maintain meaningful control over privatized warfare. The 2024 recapitalization that generated $1 billion in revenues demonstrates how private equity strategies have completely blurred the lines between corporate portfolios and private military operations. Constellis now operates according to the same financial optimization principles that Apollo applies to consumer brands, transforming warfare into quarterly earnings reports evaluated by investment analysts who treat combat deployments as business development opportunities. This transformation represents the complete privatization of American military power, where democratic accountability has been replaced by shareholder profit requirements. Apollo's $671 billion in assets under management includes a private army that generates more revenue than many Fortune 500 companies while maintaining operational secrecy that prevents meaningful public oversight. The company that emerged from Blackwater's ashes now operates as America's largest private military contractor, deploying personnel to over 50 countries while remaining virtually unknown to the American public whose tax dollars fund many of its operations.